Float fishing for mackerel. Well, I haven't done much in recent years because there's been so few mackerel about. It's been rubbish. And I've been down a few times in the last few years and not had a single bite, so I wasn't exactly over enthusiastic. Now this year, 2022, the mackerel are back, and I can do a bit of floating. Hooray, hooray! Right, so the rod I use usually is this, which is a 10-foot carp blank, and it's fiberglass. I've had it. It was a blank made by Vortex many years ago. It's probably about 40 years old, I think. I don't know. Anyway, the rings are small, as you can see by my fingertip. That's how small the tip ring is. So the stop knot on the float gear has to be very small to go for that ring. You can buy these kits, which are enormously big, and they do the job, but I wouldn't really say that's a good thing for doing because it's too heavy. All the instructions are on the back there, you can see that. Now they supply an elastic band as a float stop. Well, I suggest you use what I use, which is tied with nylon, and I should put a link to the stop knot video in the description. The floats I use are actually half floats, and even the whole size float was not as big as those. So that was originally a float that size, which is not as big as those, and it's still far too big. So I cut it in half and made two floats, one slightly larger than the other for different circumstances and different weights. I usually use this one simply because it's easier to see because it's bigger, and it's simply painted white at the top and sprayed with lacquer, car spray lacquer, whatever you got, any lacquer really, just to protect the white. The weight that takes is that much. One of these and one of those. If I only use one lead, it's not enough. It doesn't pull it down. It'll cock it, but it won't pull it down. You need to have the lead shotted so that it goes down very easily. And a light float like this is far better, and it's much more sensitive to being pulled down by the fish, and that's what you need, believe it or not, in the sea, especially when it's flat calm. This is another float about the same weight, but different type entirely. I do use this occasionally when I'm getting very sensitive bites, but generally speaking I use a slightly larger one. So you've got that one, and that one will just take, the small one will just take that lead, and it's still pretty good. It will cast a fair way. Right, the reel I use is a centre pin, which I've used for donkey's years now. This one's probably about 40 years old. Like a lot of my gear, it works. It does the job. And that's all that matters. You don't have some fancy blooming expensive reel or rod, come to that, to float fish or mackerel. Just fish with a nice light rod, maybe 3 ounce casting, 2 ounce casting, no more than that. That's all you need. You can also use a fixed ball reel. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't like fixed ball reels. I prefer multipliers or centre pins. I just like revolving drum reels. Fixed ball reels, I've got a fixed ball reel and it's given to me as a gift, and I've used it about 4 times. Nothing wrong with them, just don't like them. This one's getting old now and it's starting to wobble a little bit, but it still spins. It'll spin for a long time on its own, and that's what you need, a nice free spinning reel. So rather than me showing you, I'll show you this diagram. It's quite simple. Stop knot, which I would use nylon, not the plastic elastic band they give you. Bead, then I always put a bead underneath the float as well. Then your lead, then another bead, then the swivel, then your trace. And I should show you my trace now. Now this has got to be at least 10 years old. It's simply, I use a double hook trace because I like catching them 2 at a time. 2 at a time is quite enough for mackerel. You don't need a string of 6. So there's the trace now, I don't know if you see that. There's a swivel. The 2 hooks are tied to the swivel. And the hooks, the knots are opposite, so they're pulling away from each other. I mean, in the case of fish, they'll come together again. And the hook lengths are about, the big one's about 2 feet, just under 2 feet, and the short one's about 9-10 inches. It doesn't really matter. What you do need to do is make sure underneath the float, now you can use the elastic band for this, about a foot or so above, use the elastic band and hook it onto the elastic band. Stop the float coming down, otherwise this will fly up and catch your main trace and twist around it, and believe me, it will. So always keep the float away from the swivel, about 2 feet at least. Right, so there's your 20 Pro float kit. I bought 4 of these, I don't know why, I don't use them. And there's the lead that goes with it, which is probably maybe an ounce, 3/4 ounce, a lot of weight that is. I would never use, well, maybe if you're fishing off a cliff or somewhere where you're a long way from the float and you can't really see it easily, you might want to use one of these. But generally speaking, I would use a smaller float. But it's very difficult to buy good floats these days for fishing, sea fishing. I would try and find a picture of the floats I used to use, also made by Vortex, who made the rod 40 years ago. I haven't got the floats obviously, but still got the rod, and see if I can show you a picture of how the floats used to be and how big they were. They were probably about that high, that length, but they were much more tapered. They would just taper almost to a point there. And so, and we made a balsa wood and a flat top with the orange bit on the top to see, and they were perfect because they were so streamlined. They would fly through the air quite easily. So the trace, which is kept in the little box, consists of 2 corks held together by a bit of nail or something in the middle, and then you just push it in there slightly so it stays in there. Then you just wind it around the corks. This trace is probably 10 years old, maybe old. I have changed the line from time to time, because I changed the line actually this year because the traces get twisted up. If you catch garfish, they will twist the trace up something chronic, and so you need to replace the trace because it goes all crinkly eventually. So you need a straight trace, because crinkly traces tend to catch up with each other and tangle up. So keep the trace straight. And on to the fishing now in real time.